I graduated with $47,000 in loans. My parents had borrowed my college fund when I was 16 and never told me. My name is Daniel. I am 46 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas, and 14 months ago my wife of 13 years handed me divorce papers and simultaneously triggered a financial discovery that made the divorce papers feel almost secondary. Almost. Let me tell you about Margaret first, because understanding her is understanding everything that follows. Margaret and I met when we were both 31. She was a financial analyst, and I want you to hold that detail because it becomes very relevant, sharp, organized, the kind of person who knew where every dollar was at all times. I was a civil engineer, practical and steady, good at building things and less naturally gifted at the financial architecture that surrounds them. Our division of domestic responsibilities reflected our respective skills. I handled the physical things, the house maintenance, the cars, the practical logistics. Margaret handled the money. She paid the bills, managed our investments, tracked our spending. I had visibility into our joint accounts because I was not a passive participant, but Margaret was the one who understood the details, and I trusted her completely because she was a financial professional and my wife, and I had no reason to do otherwise. For 13 years, our financial life looked comfortable but not exceptional. We owned a home with a reasonable mortgage. We had retirement accounts that were growing appropriately. We had a joint savings account with a balance that Margaret described as adequate and that I had always accepted as adequate. We lived well without excess, and I understood this as a reflection of our income and our responsible approach to money. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Margaret served them through an attorney, which was itself a signal. No conversation, no warning, no attempt at couples therapy or discussion. Just an attorney and a document and a request to vacate the property while she retained primary occupancy during proceedings. I called my own attorney that afternoon. His name was Stephen, and he had been recommended by a colleague, and he turned out to be exactly what I needed: methodical, thorough, and deeply familiar with Texas community property law. Stephen told me the first thing we needed was a complete financial picture, and that I should not assume the picture I had was complete. He was right to say that. Stephen retained a financial forensics accountant named Howard. Howard spent 3 weeks going through everything. What he found in the second week changed the entire trajectory of the divorce proceedings. Margaret had a brokerage account in her name alone that had been open 7 years into our marriage. The account contained $380,000 in investments, index funds, some individual positions, a carefully diversified portfolio that bore the marks of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The account had been funded over 6 years through a combination of redirected income and systematic small transfers from our joint accounts in amounts carefully calibrated to avoid triggering my attention or any automatic alerts. 6 years. $380,000. In an account that I had never known existed. Howard walked me through the mechanism. Margaret earned a portion of her income through performance bonuses that were paid quarterly. Over 6 years, she had redirected approximately 60% of those bonuses. Money that I had understood to be going into our joint financial picture, into the private account. She had supplemented this with transfers from our joint savings that were individually small enough to appear as normal household expenses, but that collectively added up to a significant secondary stream. I want to give you the specific number again because I think it deserves to sit there for a moment. $380,000. Accumulated over 6 years. By a woman I had lived with and trusted and built a life with, who had been a financial professional the entire time and who had used that expertise to construct something I never saw coming. I told Stephen what Howard had found. Stephen's expression did not change because he had heard versions of this before, but he became very still in a way that told me he understood the significance. He said we needed to move carefully and document everything before we responded to Margaret's filing. We documented for 2 weeks. Howard produced a report that was 43 pages and that laid out every transaction, every transfer, every dollar of the $380,000 with sourcing and timeline. Then Stephen filed a counter-response to Margaret's divorce petition that included Howard's report as an exhibit. Margaret's attorney called Stephen within 3 hours of receiving it. The renegotiation of the divorce settlement took 4 months. Texas is a community property state, and the $380,000 accumulated during our marriage was marital property regardless of the account name. Margaret's attorney argued various things. that the money represented compensation for her greater contribution to our household finances, that some of the transfers had been legitimate household expenses that had been miscategorized in Howard's analysis, that the account had been intended as a joint retirement vehicle that she had simply not yet disclosed. None of these arguments survived contact with Howard's documentation. The final settlement reflected the actual value of our marital estate, including the $380,000. I received the house, a sum that Stephen described as appropriate, and a clean exit from a marriage that I now understood had contained a financial compartment I had never been permitted to see. Margaret moved into an apartment. I have heard through mutual acquaintances that she is still working in finance. I have no feelings about this that are worth examining. She was very good at her job. The job just turned out to include things I had not known about. Update 5 months later, my daughter, we have one daughter, Claire, who is 16, asked me recently what had happened with the money. She is old enough to understand that something significant occurred and perceptive enough to have pieced together more than I had told her. I told her an honest, age-appropriate version. I told her her mother and I had had different understandings of our finances and that those different understandings had been part of why we were no longer married. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you ever suspect?" I told her honestly that I had not. She nodded like that answered something for her that she had been wondering about. Claire splits her time between us. She is doing well in school. She is the most important thing that came from 13 years of marriage, and she is entirely intact, and that matters more than anything else in this story. I am in my house. It is mine now in a way it was not before, and I am still getting used to what that feels like. I run every morning. I cook dinner most nights, which is something I had not done in years because Margaret had always handled it, and I am discovering that I am actually decent at it. So Reddit, was I wrong to pursue the full financial investigation instead of accepting the initial divorce terms? Because Margaret's attorney said I was being aggressive and punitive. But she had $380,000 that was half mine. I want to know where you think the line was. My parents borrowed $60,000 from my college fund when I was 16. I found out at 28 when I asked about the account. My name is Sarah. I am 31 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and 3 years ago I asked my parents a simple question about a college savings account they had told me about when I was a child and discovered that the money, $60,000 that my grandparents had specifically established for my education, had been borrowed by my parents when I was 16 and never returned. I graduated from college with $47,000 in student loan debt. I have been paying that debt for 7 years. The money that was supposed to prevent that debt had been used for other purposes when I was too young to know it existed and too trusting to think to check. Let me tell you about my family first because the context matters. My grandparents on my mother's side, Frank and Helen, were not wealthy people, but they were deliberate savers who believed in education with the particular conviction of people who had not had the opportunity themselves. When I was born, they opened a college savings account for me and contributed to it regularly for 16 years. By the time I was 16 and college was approaching, the account contained approximately $60,000. My mother told me about it when I was 12, sat me down and explained that my grandparents had been saving for my education and that I would not need to worry about college costs. I held on to that information for 4 years and built my sense of my educational future around it. My parents are Richard and Carol. They have been married for 35 years. My father worked in sales, variable income, good years and difficult years. My mother worked as an office administrator, steady but modest income. They owned a home with a mortgage that stretched their budget in the difficult years and that generated periodic stress that I was aware of as a child in the way that children are aware of adult financial stress without fully understanding it. When I was 16, my parents went through a particularly difficult financial period. My father's sales commissions had dropped significantly. There was a threat of foreclosure on the house, and the stress in our household was palpable and real. My grandparents knew this, and my grandparents, who trusted their daughter, agreed to allow my parents to borrow from my college account to stabilize the household finances with a clear agreement that the money would be returned before I started college. I did not know about this agreement. I was 16. Nobody told me. The money was not returned before I started college. My parents applied for loans on my behalf, helped me navigate the financial aid process, told me the college fund money had been invested in something that had not performed as expected and that there was less available than they had hoped. I accepted this explanation because it seemed plausible in the context of market fluctuations and because these were my parents and I trusted them. I took out loans. I graduated. I began paying. My grandparents passed away. Frank when I was 22, Helen when I was 25. Neither of them ever told me what had happened with the account. I believe they assumed my parents had handled it or told me or made it right in some way that they were not aware had not occurred. I asked about the account when I was 28 because I was doing my financial planning and thinking about the various threads of my financial history, and I wanted to understand what had happened to the savings my grandparents had established. I called my mother and asked. What followed was a conversation that lasted 3 hours over 2 phone calls, and that told me the complete story for the first time. My mother was honest, I will give her that. She told me what had happened in 2008, the borrowing, the agreement to repay, the failure to repay before college, the cover story about investment performance. She cried. She said she had been carrying it for 12 years. She said she was sorry. I sat with sorry for several weeks. Sorry did not address $47,000 in student loans I was still paying. Sorry did not address 12 years of believing my grandparents' gift had simply underperformed when in reality it had been used to pay my parents' mortgage. Sorry was what someone says when they have done something wrong and want to feel better about it. I asked my parents to repay the $60,000. Not immediately, I was not unreasonable about timeline, but formally with a written agreement over a period that worked for their finances. My father's initial response was that they did not have $60,000. I said I was aware of that, and that was why I was suggesting a payment plan. My mother said they would think about it. They thought about it for 3 weeks and then came back with a counterproposal. They would give me $15,000 as a gift and consider the matter resolved. They said $60,000 was not something they could manage, and that the gift represented a genuine sacrifice, and that they hoped I would accept it in the spirit it was intended. I told them the spirit it was intended was to close a conversation they found uncomfortable with the minimum financial impact to themselves. I told them $15,000 did not address $47,000 in loans I had taken because their borrowed money had not been returned. I told them I needed them to take this seriously. We have been negotiating for 3 years. The current agreement, reached 8 months ago with the help of a mediator my therapist suggested, involves monthly payments that will total $40,000 over 5 years. It is not $60,000, and it is not the interest that $60,000 would have accrued over 15 years in an index fund. But it is something, and something is what I was able to get, and I have made my peace with that being the realistic outcome. My relationship with my parents is careful now. Not broken, I do not want it to be broken, and I do not think it needs to be, but honest in a way it was not before. My mother calls every Sunday. We talk about ordinary things. We do not talk about the money during those calls because the payment plan handles the money and the Sunday calls handle something else. My father has never fully apologized. He has paid his part of the monthly payment every month without missing one. I think that is his version of an apology, and I have decided to accept it as such. Update. For months later, my mother sent me something last month that I had not expected. She found a box of papers from when I was a child, and inside the box was a card my grandmother Helen had written when she opened the college account. It was addressed to me. It said, "For Sarah's future, so she can go anywhere she wants to go." I read that card 4 times. Then I put it on my desk where I can see it. I am going anywhere I want to go. The loans are being paid. The payments from my parents are being made. I have a job I like and an apartment I love and a life that is entirely mine. My grandmother saved $60,000 for me to have that. In the end, in a roundabout and painful way that she never intended, I have it. So Reddit, was I wrong to demand repayment instead of accepting the $15,000 and moving on? Was I wrong to involve a mediator? Because my father said I was treating family like a financial transaction. I said the financial transaction happened in 2008 when they borrowed the money. I want to know what you think. Seuss Reddit stories. My business partner of 12 years was siphoning money from our company. I found out the day he asked me to buy him out. My name is Marcus. I am 49 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 16 months ago, I discovered that my business partner of 12 years, a man I had built something real with, a man I had trusted with my livelihood and my professional reputation, had been quietly taking money from our company for 4 years in amounts that totaled when our forensic accountant finished her work, just over $290,000. I found out on the same day he sat across from me and asked me to buy out his share of the business. The timing, as you might imagine, was not a coincidence. Let me tell you about the business first. The company is a commercial construction consulting firm that Derek and I founded together 12 years ago. We had met as project managers at a larger firm, recognized complementary skills. I was the client relationship person, he was the operational detail person, and decided after 5 years of working together that we could build something better on our own. We were right. The first 3 years were difficult in the way that starting businesses is always difficult, and the following 9 were progressively more successful. By the time everything happened, we had 18 employees, a strong regional reputation, and annual revenues that made both of us comfortable. Derek and I had a genuine partnership in the ways that matter. We had each other's personal cell numbers for emergencies. We had been to each other's weddings. I had been present when Derek's father was in the hospital. He had been when my daughter was born. We had built something together, and I had believed that the something was as important to him as it was to me. Derek came to me on a Monday morning in January and said he wanted to talk about his future with the company. He said he had been thinking about it for a while and that he wanted to explore a buyout. He wanted to exit the partnership, take a fair value for his share, and pursue other things. He said he hoped we could handle it professionally and that he valued what we had built together and wanted to leave on good terms. I was surprised but not alarmed. Partners exit businesses. It happens. I told Derek I was open to discussing it and that we would need to get the company properly valued and that the process would take some time. He said he understood and seemed relaxed about the timeline. I called my attorney that afternoon, standard procedure for a buyout discussion, and my attorney said the first step was a formal business valuation. She recommended a firm she had worked with before, and I engaged them the following week. The valuation firm assigned an accountant named Patricia, who was thorough in a way that turned out to be extremely fortunate. Patricia spent 3 weeks going through 12 years of financial records. In the second week, she called me privately, not through the firm, directly to my cell phone, and said she needed to discuss something before she completed her report. What Patricia had found was a pattern of transactions over the past 4 years that she described as inconsistent with normal business operations. Vendor payments to companies she could not verify. Expense reimbursements for items that did not correspond to documented business activities. Consulting fees paid to an entity that did not appear to have any genuine business relationship with our firm. The amounts individually were small enough to pass through normal oversight. Collectively, they totaled $290,000 over 4 years. The entity receiving the consulting fees was registered to Derek's wife. I want to describe the 48 hours after that phone call because they were among the most surreal of my professional life. I had to continue interacting with Derek normally. We had client meetings, we had staff interactions, we had the ordinary business of running a company, while I was sitting on information that restructured my entire understanding of our 12-year partnership. I managed this by treating it as a professional problem to be solved rather than a personal betrayal to be felt. The feeling came later. The management came first. I brought Patricia's findings to my attorney. My attorney brought in a forensic accountant of her own to verify Patricia's work. The verification took 1 week and confirmed everything Patricia had found and added 2 additional transaction categories she had not yet identified, bringing the total to $312,000. My attorney advised me on my options. Civil litigation was viable and likely to succeed given the documentation. Criminal referral was possible. Fraud and theft from a business partnership can constitute criminal conduct. Negotiated resolution was also an option. Structured repayment as part of the buyout process, which would avoid litigation while recovering the funds. I chose negotiated resolution with litigation as the explicit backup. My attorney drafted a document that laid out everything Patricia and her verification had found and delivered it to Derek's attorney. Derek's attorney called my attorney within 2 hours. The negotiation that followed lasted 3 weeks. Derek did not deny the transactions when presented with the documentation. His position, through his attorney, was that he had been underpaid for his contributions to the business over several years and had been compensating himself for what he considered a compensation imbalance. My attorney pointed out that our partnership agreement had a specific process for addressing compensation concerns and that the process Derek had chosen was not it. The buyout agreement we reached reflected the full value of Derek's legitimate share of the business minus the $312,000 he had taken. He received less than he had been expecting when he sat across from me and asked for the buyout. He signed the agreement. He left the company. Our 18 employees never knew the full details. I told them Derek had decided to pursue other opportunities and that the company was continuing under my sole ownership. They accepted this because it was true in the limited way that matters for day-to-day operations. Derek and I have not spoken since the agreement was signed. 12 years of partnership ended in a conference room with 2 attorneys and a document. What I think about most is the timing of his buyout request. He had been taking money for 4 years. He came to me asking for a buyout the same day. He apparently decided the extraction had run its course or that the risk of detection was increasing. He had been planning his exit while continuing to take. The buyout was supposed to be his clean conclusion to something I was never supposed to discover. He did not get the clean conclusion. Update: 4 months later, the business is doing well. Better than I expected for the first year of sole ownership because some of the operational inefficiencies that Patricia identified during the valuation, inefficiencies that turned out to be partially attributable to the way Derek had structured certain vendor relationships, have been cleaned up and the cost savings have been meaningful. I hired a new operations director 3 months ago. Her name is Jennifer and she is excellent and she asks questions that Derek would have answered with authority and that I now verify with documentation because I have learned that trust in a business context requires infrastructure that I did not previously build. One of our longtime clients asked me recently how Derek was doing. I said he had moved on to other things and that we wished him well. The client nodded and said he had always thought Derek seemed stressed in the last couple of years. I said I thought that was probably accurate and changed the subject. My daughter started kindergarten last month. I took the morning off to walk her in on her first day. She held my hand on the way in and let go when she saw her classroom and did not look back. I stood in the hallway for a moment after she went through the door and thought about what it means to build something and watch it become its own thing. So Reddit, was I wrong to choose negotiated settlement over criminal referral? Because some people say Derek should have faced criminal consequences and that the money was not the only point. But I had 18 employees and a company and a reputation and a daughter who started kindergarten and I wanted to close this and move forward. Tell me what you think. So what do you think? Was she wrong or completely justified? Drop your verdict below. Subscribe for daily Reddit stories. And I will see you in the next one.